Hey everyone, welcome back. It's me, Only Run Very Noob, bringing you more Bravo gameplay on the Talishar client. Today, again, we are battling Boltyn. Sideboard, no Zealous Belting, no Sigil of Solace, no Chokeslam. Chokeslam can be pretty good. It prevents them from getting +1. Doesn't stop Lumina Ascension though, because that pumps a weapon, not an attack action. Sometimes they play some pump spells that it stops, but I prefer Pummel. Just on the off chance they're playing Sabers, we want to be able to pummel a Command and Conquer. An opening hand like this, there's basically just two options, which is make a Surge and Arsenal the Sink Below without attacking, or dominating like Debilitate to try to leak some damage, and then arsenaling the Sink Below. I opt for option 1, just make a Surge and arsenal the Sink Below. It prevents them from cycling a card from their hand, and Surge is just can be quite good into the aggro matchups. You draw a Crippling Crush or a Starstruck. It lets you still block quite a bit and throw a big attack that they have to stop. We don't draw much with this hand. Kind of looking to block with our hand and save our React and Arsenal. I like having Reacts against Boltyn. They're good against their Lumina Ascension turns, as it just cleanly blocks the Raiden at 4. And then they're also good at sometimes just blanking their entire turn if they don't want to use Snapdragon Scalers and they lead on an attack that doesn't have Go Again or a buff inherently. With them not having any soul though, it looks like here he has an attack that doesn't have buffs or Go Again, so we're just going to give him the Warmonger Diplomacy. Using this hand aggressively, again, there's probably two options. You can make a Surge and throw Thunderquake, but I do elect to dominate the Disable. It's worth a little bit more if it gets the Crush effect, and it might even entice them to use some armor. If they can't stop this without armor, I almost think they shouldn't, unless their Arsenal card is like incredibly good, like Lumina Ascension. But sometimes you even get like a React out of Arsenal here, and if they're using Reacts on like a blue Disable, that's great. So yeah, they elect to just Soul Shield it, which is definitely reasonable for them, of course, but I think it's pretty good for us that they don't have that Soul Shield for later, for our attacks that we really care about. With a hand like this, it's not the greatest. I'd like to be able to throw the Crippling Crush, so we are probably Sink Belowing this Engulfing Light. It's just, what do we sink to the bottom? We could sink the Pummel or the Fate Foreseen. I think sinking the Fate Foreseen is quite aggressive. I like having a defense reaction in Arsenal for their Lumina turns. And sometimes these games kind of can go pretty long. Like you'll hit the first hand you pitch, so like you'll hit second cycle. You probably won't get too much further than that. So Sink Belowing a Pummel to the bottom is probably pretty good. We might be able to close the game out with a Pummel if we're allowed to keep 3 cards in the end game. And having the Fate Foreseen in Arsenal is just quite a good safety net. So I think we are looking to sink below this Engulfing Light, either make them use Snapdragons or end their turn, and putting the Pummel to the bottom. The Fate Foreseen could be very good late too though, so it's like I think either sink target is like reasonable here. We don't get a blue, but we do get a yellow, so we just get to throw the Spinal. It's not too much worse than a blue. A blue would let us make a Surge, but I don't think we would dominate over having a Fate in Arsenal with him having all his armor up and an Arsenal of his own. I think we just throw Spinal and maybe try to get a bunch of cards here. He gives us all 3 cards instead of just blocking 6, which is pretty good. And we get a lucky break here. We get a hand that we want to keep. He doesn't charge this bolt, so we happily take 3 here. We're not going to use our defense reaction arsenal. And of course, 3 blues and Crippling Crush. We dominate a Crippling Crush. Hoping to get through some of this armor. There's always a chance he has a defense reaction in arsenal, though. But easily worth taking 3 damage with no effects to threaten this. Is why you play the deck. So he does have a red Steelblade Shunt in arsenal. He doesn't take any damage, but interestingly enough, it still does cost him 3 cards. And we immediately draw the same hand. I think he draws the same attack too, just Bolt of Courage red with no charge. So again, easily take 3 to throw this back. We're hoping he doesn't have another React in arsenal, but what wouldn't he charge? It's basically React and Lumina Ascension, I think. Beacon of Victory, which is essentially a Lumina Ascension. But definitely happy to take 3 to dominate a Crippling Crush. Maybe if we had a Surge, we would like block 3 just to throw a naked Crippling Crush, but you got to get through the armor somehow. And I think it's worth 3 damage to do it for sure. Interestingly enough, Boltyn has more armor block than Bravo with the new chest, because the new chest basically blocks 5, blocks 3, and then 2 if he charges. It does cost him a card from hand, so it's not like free, but it does allow him to stop a lot of our crush effects. I think that chest is really good. When I first saw that card, I didn't think it was that great because it cost you the card, but as a Bravo player, we don't want to let them block with cards, and it lets them turn a card into like some mitigation. E-Strike for 7. We have another React in hand, so we're probably just looking to get the Fate Foreseen out, get a little value. Topping the Terra Sunder for 2 reasons. Terra Sundering Boltyn's very good. They get a lot worse on few cards. And then it's also a good defensive tool because it's not an attack. So it can block something and not give them the Boltyn pump. We don't block extra on the E-Strike, but we only throw a hammer with 2 cards behind, so Pummel's definitely face up here. But if he has a good turn, he can probably just go to 26. He's been keeping his life total quite high, which I think is pretty good for him. It allows him to have the freedom to just take 10 in spots like this if he has like a very strong hand. We draw a good defensive hand, only 1 attack, so we could block a bunch without giving him pumps. So he pitches a Soul Shield. And V for the Vanguard, which is one of his premier threats here. I just take 4 because this damage is really just damage. We want to be saving our defense reactions and our blocks to block a Raiden after Lumina Ascension. He take flights here, and I really do think I shouldn't block this. I think I should just take this 4, either expecting Lumina, or if it's not Lumina, I could just block the Raiden for 3 with the Imposing Visage and save the React. And he does end up having the Lumina, which punishes us a little bit. We get to use our reaction on one of them, an Arsenal, not the Unmovable, because I do want to Terra Sunder him. But with the second swing, we end up needing to make a decision if we want to just take 4, give him a soul and a life, most likely, or use equipment. And it's not like a super easy decision, Because when we do this, the equipment are really only getting like half an additional value each. But I end up just using the equipment. He has enough soul, like 3 soul is enough that stopping the soul, like it, while good, isn't like insane. Like if he was on 1 soul, like yeah, we don't want him to have a second soul. But 3, he's probably going to be able to have plenty of soul for the rest of the game. We keep our 3-card hand to tear asunder because he's not going to have an arsenal, and he can actually only really use equipment if he has a defense reaction in hand, because his equipment would only block 3, and then he would need either a sink below or better to stop the effect. We do see a block of 1, so it must mean a soul shield or another steel blade shunt, which to be honest isn't the worst in the world. He doesn't take damage, but he still does have to give us 2 cards. We would like to get damage, but the real good part about Tear Asunder is Boltyn with less cards is pretty bad. Oftentimes when Boltyn only has 2 cards, they basically can only throw like 3 damage at you. Of course, sometimes they can throw like 7 with the Raiden if they have an attack that can pump itself. With this hand and him attacking us with this Bolt of Courage, we could sink below the Bolt of Courage and save our equipment, but I think having the sink and arsenal is better. So I think I'm inclined to just block with a couple equipment, tear asunder him again, and have a sink below an arsenal. Definitely don't want him to draw a card. Even if he doesn't use Snapdragons, we don't want him to have a card in arsenal. Boltyn on 3 cards is like twice as good as Boltyn on 2 cards. With 2 cards he can't Lumina Ascension us, but with 3 cards he can. And Lumina Ascension is a hell of a card. It's basically like a 0 for 5, and that's not even counting the soul gain and the life gain, so it could be like a 0 for 6 with 2 life gain. But it requires 2 cards, 2 other cards, like a charge card and a card 2 charge. He ends up just taking 7 here. I think's pretty good for us. And he command and conquers us with a courage token, which is very good 2-card hand for him. So as you see, I go to block 6, and then I realize there's a courage, and I'm like, do I give him equipment? There's another thing to consider here. He doesn't have an arsenal, so our command and conquer we're throwing back isn't that great. We could save the 1 equipment and just give him 3 cards and attack for 4 instead of 6. Of course, because the command and conquer on hit's not doing anything. The clause of it not being blocked by a defense reaction is probably not doing anything either, because I think he would prefer to keep a reaction for arsenal. But 2 extra damage is a thing, and the surge is also definitely a thing. So I think with those things considered, it is worth giving up a Crater Fist for 2 damage and a Seismic Surge. We only have 1 Crippling Crush left in our deck, but we do have 2 Starstrucks that we haven't seen yet. Of course, we saw 1 that we had to pitch to play our Spinal Crash early on. And there's a chance he has Sink Below in his deck. We've seen Soul Shield and Steel Blade Shunt. There's a chance he plays 3 Sink Below as well, and his hand might just have like 2 Sink Below, and then this would be like incredibly good. I don't think there's a high chance of him having Sink Below if he has Steel Blade Shunt, but it's possible. So he just takes 6. And we draw an interesting 4 cards. With him having a 4-card hand, we're probably willing to take some damage here. We are up 12 life, and we have a Crippling Crush and a Surge. I think I want to use the Sink Below to sink the Command and Conquer, looking for a blue so I can dominate a Crippling Crush. We've already seen him put one Soul Shield to the bottom, played one, and 2 Steelblade Shunts, I believe. So there's only 1 Steelblade Shunt in his deck that would allow him to stop this Crippling Crush. It is turn 10 though, so he's seen 66% of his deck. I don't believe he's shuffled. We haven't seen a beacon yet, so it's not like that Soul Shield could have come back. So yeah, I think I am looking to Sink Below the Command and Conquer into a blue. And he plays an attack that doesn't have go again, so we get to even pass, expecting to sink and see if he uses his boots. He ends up using the boots. I'm definitely afraid of Lumina Ascension here. But what I'm thinking is if I sink the Command and Conquer now, I can see what my hand is to maybe block better. And if he Lumina Ascensions me, I'm almost willing to take 8 and give him 2 life so that I can dominate a Crippling Crush. But he ends up only doing E-Strike, which is very good for us because we're happy to just take 10 here. Because he's going to give the E-Strike go again and then attack with Raiden, but then he's going to have no arsenal. Which means our Crippling Crush will land even if he has Steelblade Shunt. Because he only has 1 armor block. 1 plus 6 is 7. And if you're a Bravo player, you know that 7 is not enough block to stop the Crippling Crush. Our life advantage really helps us out here. Because we're allowed to just take, like, he took 10 earlier and we saved our opportunity to just take 10 there. There was a slight consideration for Rouse the Ancients because it is lethal. You know, it's the 13 damage, but a Crippling Crush that we know he has his guards down, I think is just better. Draw kind of a poopy one. I do end up Macho Grandeing here, looking to Arsenal the Thunderquake. So Arsenaling the Thunderquake does 2 things. One, it gives us something to crown away if we draw like a big hand that we want to block with a card but still maybe have 3 blues plus a Starstruck. But it also is an attack for 8. And if he doesn't have a defense reaction in Arsenal or a 4 block in hand, he just will go to 1 off this Macho Grande because he blocks 3 plus this 4 going to 1. And if he goes to 1, our Thunderquake's very good because we can just like block 2 cards, keep 2 cards, and attack with Thunderquake, and then all of a sudden he has to give us 3 cards. And this is pretty good because even if he draws Soul Shield or Steelblade Shunt, I think he can only draw the Steelblade Shunt. Soul Shield's probably still on the bottom of his deck. It's still going to take 3 cards because he has to pitch to play, and then he can't take the 2 that leaks because he'll be at 1. There's like no chance this Macho Grande kills him because he has 1 armor block. But we do want to get him low. Maybe you could dominate the disable, but for the same reason he could protect that card if he wanted to with the Iron Song versus. Only take 3. Being at 2 is almost the same as 1 versus the Thunderquake. But if he Lumina Ascensions and gains a life, then 3 is a lot different than 2. But if he's at 1, we can even let him gain a life with Lumina, and he'll still have to give us 3 cards for the 8 attack. Him being at 1 and us being at 14 looks very good for us here. A lot of damage we can just take. So we just take this. We've only seen 1 Lumina Ascension though, so I'm definitely expecting 1 to be coming up like right here. So a little unfortunate we didn't get any disruption last turn, but Not a bad spot all around. And 5 soul and 4 soul seem very similar to me, so I'm also just willing to take this 4. Because if all he does is send Engulfing Light for 4 and then Raiden for 3, we can just go to 3 and dominate Spinal as well. He asks for an undo because his arsenal is not Lumina Ascension, it is the Beacon. So it's basically Lumina Ascension, but it gives him 1 life, or 1 more damage, I should say. And I think our line here is fairly clear. We Fate Foreseen a Raiden, and then we block with our Crown of Providence and Spinal Crush. We don't use Crown Effect. We just block out all the damage and then throw a Thunderquake for 8, which I just talked about will require a 3-card block from him. We could let him gain a life off the Raiden, but we don't want to take any damage. Getting down to really low lives against Boltyn can be tough, because then if we just draw like 4 attacks, he probably kills us if he ever is allowed to have like 2-card hand. He shuffles, so we got to worry about his other 2 reacts, which he only has like 27 cards in his deck in hand, so that react's got to be. He has 2 big reacts we got to worry about. Good thing is, it's still just going to cost him a ton of cards when he's at 1. There's a decision here. We could just throw Starstruck for 10, or we can dominate the Spinal Crush. If we dominate Spinal Crush, we beat basically everything except Reaction and Arsenal. If he has Reaction and Arsenal, Starstruck's better because it will take 4 cards, right? Because he's going to have to pitch 1 to block 6 from Arsenal, and then he's going to have to block 4 from hand, which presumably all of his cards block 3. We haven't seen a Sink Below. It's turn 13, so probably doesn't have that. So it's a really close call. I actually don't know what the better play is here. I do kind of like... I do tend to play to make them have it, so I think I do like the Spinal Crush line. With the Spinal Crush line, we even get a Surge, so maybe the Surge is the tiebreaker there. Let me know down in the comments what you think. It's kind of an interesting spot. I think about it, and then I do end up going for the Dominate Spinal line. He ends up having the Soul Shield, but he does have to pitch 2 reds for it, which is quite a big break for us. 1 card's much less scary than 2, and 2 is like exponentially less scary than 3. He just ends the turn, and I wish I could rouse the Ancients, but we can't, so we're just going to Tear Asunder. And I'm going to save the Cranial Crush for Arsenal because it only requires a 2-card hand to play, and it's an attack for 8 when your opponent's at 1 is very good. Where if we Arsenaled the Rouse, we'd have to keep 3 cards in our hand to turn it on. Resolving this Rouse would almost assuredly win the game, but it just requires a little bit more. from us. So we get through his last steel blade shunt. Little unfortunate he has that there, but it is what it is. And he attacks with the E-Strike for 7, which is pretty good. I end up just blocking with Starstruck and Pummel, going down to 2, and then so I can attack for 8. I think getting 3 cards out of him is better than staying at 4 and then only being able to hammer for 4 to get 2 cards out. That's also kind of a close call though. I just feel so safe knowing that he's going to have to give us 3 cards on the 8. But him having to give us 2 cards on the 4 is also pretty good. But it only saves us 2 life, so if we value one of his cards higher than 2 life, just taking 2 and sending 8 is a little better. I'm checking for all his reacts. Yeah, we've got through all 3 shunts and all 3 soul shields. So presumably he's going to have a 1-card hand that can only deal like 3. And we'll be able to block and like dominate. Or as we see here, we have that Pummel that we sunk below at the beginning of the game. Had it been the Fate Foreseen instead of the Pummel, it would have still been good enough to win here. But that Fate Foreseen also prevented Illumina hit earlier, which I think was probably good. Who knows what the Pummel would have accomplished though. He says good game, so I answer good game. I know you can't see the chat, it's trapped behind my camera, but I didn't just good game him here out of nowhere. That'd be a little silly. He must know that there's a Pummel here, because if I blocked with a blue and I'm not sending the Thunderquakes in my pitch zone, that's a pretty strong indication that I'm pummeling. And that's the game. Hopefully that game is a little bit more competitive game against the same hero I posted a video of yesterday. I thought that game was pretty good. It actually got a lot closer than I thought. I got a couple lucky breaks with him needing to pitch 2 reds to play the Soul Shield at the end. Also, like early, I had 3 blues and a Crippling Crush into 3 blues and a Crippling Crush that really taxed his resources. When I sunk below with a 3 red hand, I hit a yellow, so I was still able to Spinal Crush, and he ended up blocking with 3 cards there. There were just a lot of things in this game that I think kind of went in our favor. So even though I won, I think this was a game I could have easily lost if a couple things went differently. The matchup's definitely not easy. They have a lot of armor, and if they're playing 3 shunts, 3 soul shields, they can basically just stymie your crush effects. And in tight endgame situations, it can get pretty hard, because if they're like charging, and if they have like a Celestial Cataclysm in the deck somewhere, it can just get quite dicey. He only got to resolve 2 Lumina Ascensions. I think if he played all 3, we would have lost. It's a fun matchup though. It's kind of mid-rangey. You might think more Boltyns are like an aggro deck, but aggro decks really have to slow down against us. If they just go super fast and give us full value on our crush effects, they just kind of get blown out of the water. So hopefully we had fun. Hopefully we learned a little bit. Like, comment, subscribe down below. And I'll be back tomorrow with some more footage for you guys to watch. And gameplay for me to analyze. Thanks for watching.